It's a big fight, is what it is.
The big fight Mr. Orphanides is talking about is the LAPD chief thumbing his nose at state law, which mandates that they impound cars driven by unlicensed drivers. Since when can a police chief simply refuse to obey state law? That's coming up next on Full Disclosure.
Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news.
Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're bringing you the news behind the news in our interview with Director of Litigation for Judicial Watch, Paul Orphanides. He started by explaining LAPD's new Special Order 7.
It's a new policy, came into effect, I think, in the spring of 2012, and what it tries to do is to diminish the impact of a California statute that gives officers the discretion to impound the vehicles that are driven by unlicensed drivers. So if someone is pulled over and they're found not to be a licensed driver, under California law, the officer has the discretion to impound the vehicle.
That's California law. LAPD Chief Beck seems to consider himself in a different altered state of some kind. Because the Los Angeles mayor wants LA to be a sanctuary city for illegal aliens, the police chief has chosen to write his own special order and simply ignore the law. We ask why the ACLU would be involved in a traffic dispute.
There's a claim that unlawfully present aliens are not able to get driver's licenses, so they're affected by this statute more often than others. And the two organizations that are trying to intervene in lawsuits, many of their members or their members' family members are unlawfully present aliens, and they're impacted by this new policy. They are benefited by this new policy that tries to minimize the impact of that California law.
Judicial Watch filed suit to stop this contemptuous mockery of state law. Mr. Orphanides came directly from the courthouse for our interview.
The hearing was about whether or not two entities represented by the ACLU could be allowed to intervene in our lawsuit challenging the LAPD, the City of Los Angeles, is their new impound policy. The policy for impounding cars driven by unlicensed drivers.
The two entities trying to push their way into the lawsuit on the side of the city are LA Voice and CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles. Both are radical Latino organizations, ostensibly trying to return California to Mexico. Why is the ACLU representing these people?
They're representing organizations that either the organizations have members who drive regularly without a license, or they have family members who drive regularly without a license, or in the case of LA Voice, which is an organization of organizations, those organizations' members or family members regularly drive unlawfully and apparently want to continue to do so.
So Special Order 7 has been in force for several months now. We asked Mr. Orphanides if the failure to impound vehicles has caused any problems. And what impact has it had so far?
That's something we want to find out in discovery. I've seen some news reports that say the number of impounds conducted by the LAPD since this policy went into effect has decreased rather dramatically. That was just sort of an anecdotal media report. I think it was in the LA Times, but that's one of the sorts of things we might want to try to find out in the course of this discovery is just what impact is this policy really having.
Do fewer impounds result in more traffic accidents? It only seems logical that impounding cars from unlicensed drivers means fewer opportunities for unlicensed drivers to get into accidents. Full Disclosure has done some research into this topic and found some startling statistics. For example, there is a direct correlation between unlicensed drivers and hit-and-run accidents for obvious reasons. The Federal Department of Transportation produces a FARS report, which stands for Fatality Analysis Reporting System. According to this report, The top 7 states with the largest populations of illegal immigrants are the top hit-and-run fatality states. AAA found that unlicensed drivers are 66 times more likely to be a hit-and-run driver than a licensed driver. So why would these Latino organizations attempt to pile on with the ACLU in supporting LA's defiance of state law?
So they've gone into court and they're trying to say that they should be allowed to defend the new policy along with the city. And in addition to that, if they win, they were saying that they would like to recover their attorney's fees from our client, a taxpayer and citizen resident of the city of Los Angeles.
Aha, so now we know why the ACLU is representing these organizations. They see a potentially large payday if they're victorious. And most times the ACLU persuades the court to award them exorbitant legal fees. But this time they are facing a non-governmental organization that has a spine and isn't willing to cower in fear. Judicial Watch is standing up to all of them in support of their client, Mr. Sturgeon, and all law-abiding taxpayers of California.
Our claim is basically that the city didn't have the legal authority under California law to enact this policy. There's impounding is governed by statute, something passed by the General Assembly up in Sacramento, and generally the vehicle laws, traffic laws are supposed to be uniform across the state. So the California Vehicle Code actually says no municipality or local government shall enact policies concerning traffic measures. And that just makes sense because you want the traffic rules in LA to be the same as the traffic rules in Santa Monica, right? You don't want that sort of block-to-block change to make a difference.
That patchwork approach would force California drivers out of their minds. Whereas Judicial Watch is arguing the suit is on its legal merits, the ACLU wants to add a whole bunch of immigrant persecution complaints.
We've gone into court and we're saying this policy violates California law, violates the California Constitution because the city didn't have authority to enact the policy. The ACLU and their clients are saying yes, it did. It did have that authority, and in fact these are necessary. This policy change is necessary to protect against racial profiling and to protect against LAPD violations of people's constitutional rights. So what they're trying to do is inject into our lawsuit not so much issues about revisiting driver's licenses, but inject history and practices of racial profiling and constitutional violations. That's not at all what our lawsuit's about, and that's one of the reasons why we were trying to object. We did object to these people's participation in our lawsuit.
It is interesting to note the emphasis of the ACLU.
The focus of their argument is the unlawfully present alien community, the undocumented aliens, who they say are only here trying to drive. They're just trying to drive to their employment so they can make money for their family. You would have unlawfully present aliens driving to their unlawful employment without a license, so even their driving is unlawful. So, I mean, there's multiple levels of illegality going on here, and that's what the ACLU and these two entities are trying to defend.
The ACLU has said that they are targeting the illegal alien community.
Not targeting, representing them. They're trying to protect their interests.
They've actually said that.
Yeah, it's in. You have the papers in front of you.
Okay, so this isn't. Their primary concern is not about impounding cars of people in general that are driving without licenses. It's
right.
Only a particular group of people.
That's right. They're trying to protect unlawfully present aliens who they say can't get driver's licenses. They need driver's licenses to drive to their jobs, to drive their kids to school, and they say this California law is has a disparate impact on them. It affects them more than it affects other groups, and I'm not quite sure I understand that. I guess because it's difficult for them to get driver's licenses.
Just to be sure, we ask again, was the effort of the ACLU designed in any way to help American citizens whose cars were impounded when they were caught driving without a driver's license?
No. Oh, not at all. This is all about according to their moving papers, a disparate impact on unlawfully present aliens.
And rather than back down to the ACLU, he's really up for the fight.
So it was a bit of a barn burner of a hearing. It was fun.
We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll hear what happened at that barn burner of a hearing. We'll be right back.
In the government, there's a phrase used to restrict access to information. That phrase, need to know. At fulldisclosure.net, we want you to have all the information you need to be an informed citizen, unlimited access to all the information we've gathered on our TV show. And if you can't watch us on your local cable station, streaming video of complete shows when you want them. Fulldisclosure.net, when you need to know the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and our interview with Paul Orphanides, the Director of Litigation for Judicial Watch. He plainly stated his case as established by California state law.
The law is very clear. If you drive without a license, your vehicle is subject to be impounded. That's a decision that the legislature has made is important. It thinks it's important to protect the people of California from, and anybody else like myself who happens to be visiting, from unlicensed drivers. And the ACLU and their clients think that's too harsh. So they're trying to support the city's efforts to undermine that public safety measure.
But how can a city police chief write his own laws? Is LA a feudal state where the king has the ultimate power to decide how the peasants shall live? And where does the ACLU get off thinking that they should get their exorbitant legal fees paid if the city prevails?
Well, it's a great question because it's very much tied up with the First Amendment and the right to petition your government for redress of grievances, the rights of taxpayers under California law to sue to stop unlawful expenditures of taxpayer dollars. Let me just back up a minute and talk about what intervention is. We represent Pat Sturgeon, who's a LA citizen, LA resident citizen taxpayer. One of our co-plaintiffs in the lawsuit is the LA Police Protective League. We brought this lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. We did not name these organizations. These organizations are trying to become parties to the lawsuit. So they are voluntarily, they're going before the court and saying, Judge, please let us be defendants. Please let us be sued in this lawsuit.
Talk about a perversion of justice. Here's how really twisted it is.
People we did not sue, who voluntarily seek to come into our lawsuit to defend the city, would also be seeking attorney's fees from us in the event that they win, or in the event that we do not prevail. That already seems somewhat odd to start because they're voluntarily trying to be sued, but then they're also trying to seek attorney's fees in the event that we're not successful. They're asking the court to be allowed to participate as defendants, and if we don't prevail, that they can recover their attorney's fees. That impacts our First Amendment rights, the First Amendment rights of our client as a taxpayer and as a U.S. citizen to petition his government for the redress of grievances, and also under California law, there's this taxpayer provision that I mentioned.
The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution includes the right to petition government for redress of grievances. That certainly includes the right to sue any level of government to force it to correct unlawfully enacted policies. This right would no longer be practical if losing that suit would cost you a fortune in legal fees.
California's decided we want to encourage taxpayers to come forward in order to bring lawsuits challenging allegedly unlawful expenditures by the government. So if you're trying to encourage lawsuits, if you're trying to protect someone's right to petition their government, one thing you don't want to do is to chill that by having the possibility that they might have to pay attorney's fees. It's a fairly basic fundamental First Amendment right, this concept of chilling someone's First Amendment rights. And you don't want to do anything that would prevent them from invoking their rights or acting on their rights. But the ACLU apparently needs a primer in what the First Amendment means because they didn't seem to understand this, that we are bringing this lawsuit in the exercise of our First Amendment rights. We have a right to petition the government.
As Mr. Orphanides points out, they're representing a citizen who is suing City Hall, According to the protections of the First Amendment, City Hall wouldn't collect any fees if they win.
The government or the city would not have the ability to recover fees from us if we do not prevail. And yet they're seeking this extra benefit, this opportunity for fees. And what we said was that would have a chilling effect on our First Amendment rights. So what the judge did was, after about, I don't know, half an hour of back and forth, it was quite a barn burner of an argument, the judge actually changed his mind. He originally was going to allow the ACLU and their clients to intervene without any sort of restriction on their right to seek fees.
So the judge was going to allow the ACLU, representing the radical Latino groups, to soak the citizen, Mr. Sturgeon, for all kinds of legal fees. Originally. That is before Judicial Watch stood up to them and presented the opposition.
At the end, he changed his mind, and he said, "You're right, I agree with the plaintiffs." And he used the phrase New York Minute. He said, "You know, if I'm the plaintiff and I have brought this lawsuit and I now realize that I have there's a potential that I could have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees to the ACLU or to anybody for having brought this lawsuit, I'd be out of that lawsuit in a New York minute." That's what he said. "I'd be out in a New York minute." So he changed his position. He allowed them to intervene, which we were a little bit disappointed with, but he did at least recognize that there are some important First Amendment rights here that needed to be protected, and he said that the ACLU and their clients couldn't seek fees from us.
This chilling effect should be obvious, even to the ACLU.
If I know that I could be subject to claims for having to pay someone else's attorney's fees if I bring a lawsuit, that's going to affect my willingness to bring that lawsuit or to continue it. And that's basic First Amendment law. You don't chill people's right to exercise their First Amendment rights. The ACLU didn't seem to appreciate that at this morning's hearing.
We asked Mr. Orphanides if he thought Judicial Watch could follow the ACLU's example and pile on against them whenever they sue a public entity. He was very clear that Judicial Watch is entirely different in both philosophy and practice than the ACLU.
At Judicial Watch, we don't look to the state or to any county or local government to provide us with the funds we need to bring the lawsuits that we file. Our supporters provide that support to us. I don't see why the ACLU should be any different. And we don't try to intervene as defendants in their lawsuits and seek attorney's fees from them, because we recognize in some circumstances they have a legitimate First Amendment right to bring whatever lawsuit that they want to bring.
Judicial Watch started this case by suing the city of Los Angeles, and now they're facing not only the city, but also the legal beagles from the ACLU. The city has been sued by the ACLU on many previous occasions. We wondered how this new unholy partnership is working.
We're challenging the LAPD policy, and the LAPD is going to be having help now in defending it from the ACLU. So, perhaps they're welcoming this help in defending their policy.
But they've been adversaries for decades. How can they possibly work together against Judicial Watch?
The ACLU wants to be lined up with the city as a defendant. We're suing the city, challenging the city's policy. The city's going to defend the policy. The ACLU and its clients are now going to come in and try to defend the policy as well. So the city's probably looking at this as saying, well, this can only help us to defend the policy because now we have another set of legal, another legal team and another set of arguments that will, presumably be used to help it defend the policy that we're challenging.
So how is Judicial Watch going to confront these dual adversaries? He summarized their position.
The state of California has decided that this impound statute that it enacted is necessary to protect the public safety, protect the public welfare. The city of LA is trying to draw back on that. They're trying to undermine or diminish or minimize the impact of that statute.
It seems odd that a law enforcement agency would not only refuse to enforce a law, but instead write a policy in direct opposition to it. We asked him if other agencies were taking any position on this issue.
The district attorneys weighed in and determined that the city did not have the authority to enact this policy. I know the Legislative Council, the council to the General Assembly in California, or in Sacramento, issued an opinion saying that the city did not have authority to enact this policy. I believe the Attorney General's office did the opposite, that they looked at it and they said, yes, the city does have this authority. So, you know, different actors have come in with different perspectives.
The ACLU prides itself on its defense of the First Amendment.
They used to.
It's one of the few organizations that takes the time to really investigate and dig deep, and they're covering things nobody else does. I think it plays a very vital role in helping the community, and in a free society we're dependent upon free journalism doing their job. Full Disclosure's done an incredible job of that.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and our interview with Paul Orphanides, the Director of Litigation for Judicial Watch. We asked Mr. Orphanides to evaluate his potential for winning this case.
We've got very good, strong arguments. I think the California law is very clear that municipalities and local authorities are not supposed to enact their own regulations governing traffic issues, and I think that's exactly what the city has done. There's a lot of pressure, I think, to come to a different outcome, as there often seems to be in California. You know, laws are passed and people in governments don't seem to like those laws, so they come up with ways around them.
This seems to be a direct result of the politicalization of the police department. The Los Angeles police chief is no longer a civil service employee, but rather a political appointee of the mayor. If Mayor Villaraigosa doesn't like a state or a federal law, then Chief Beck is obligated to do his bidding. So in Los Angeles, enforcement policies are driven by the political whim of the mayor's politics, whose foremost sympathy is with the lawless, paperless immigrants in Los Angeles. We asked Mr. Orphanides, isn't this an erosion of the rule of law?
Absolutely, and that's why we're in this fight, because we think rule of law is important. We think, we don't say whether the statute that the General Assembly passed is a good or a bad one, but it passed it. If you don't like it, change the law. There was an effort to change the law in the last legislative session. It didn't succeed. So the answer there is to not undermine the law that's on the books, but to change the law that's on the books. I mean, that's the right way to do this.
But the right way is not the way people in power make decisions. The power brokers in Los Angeles have a long history of using their positions to gain advantage and then reward those who support their efforts with generous contracts or benefits denied those who oppose them. It's no longer the rule of law, but instead the rule of men in power. We asked Mr. Orphanides if that was the biggest motivator for Judicial Watch to fight this Special Order 7.
Oh, sure. I mean, I see this as a huge rule of law issue. And I mean, it's part of the sort of the corrosive effect of the whole illegal immigration debate, and the failure or the lack of an emphasis on rule of law there. But I think you see it in other contexts as well, even the medicinal marijuana laws and how California's been struggling to deal with that whole debacle. I mean, I'll call it a debacle because it just doesn't make any sense. But what it is just a gradual erosion of the rule of law in general. And rather than changing the laws that are on the books through the political process, people go to court to try to undermine laws. You have municipalities and counties that try to cut corners and appeal to constituents by softening the effect of the law. I mean, all of it's undermining the rule of law.
According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, their Office of Immigration Statistics estimated that 2.6 million illegal immigrants reside in California, which represents about 25% of all illegal immigrants in the United States. What that means is that we have more people in Los Angeles who are in the country illegally, who are overflowing our schools, our hospitals, and gobbling up the CalFresh food stamps and other benefits designed to help poor American citizens. And just this week, LAPD Chief Beck is now refusing to turn over to the feds criminals who are known to be illegal immigrants. Why are the policies of the Los Angeles city working in opposition to the laws of the state and the nation?
Those are great questions, and I would love to see, a full-throated debate in the mayoral election about that issue, about what the city of LA is going to do with respect to the unlawfully present alien population. I just don't think that that's going to happen. I think the issue is fairly well settled in Los Angeles, unless the people of Los Angeles really demand it. I think at least among the political class, it's been decided that it's going to do what it's done. It's going to continue with its Special Order 40. It's going to, it's going to try to continue to do things like enact policies like Special Order 7, the new impound policy. So.
We asked Mr. Orphanides to explain the next step for this case. Now that you have an intervener, what's the next step?
There will be, the city has moved to dismiss. They filed a demur, and that's going to be heard on November 9th, and I would expect that to be denied because the issue there really is our complaint sufficient to add up to a claim? And I think the issue is yes. And that issue is different from the broader legal question of whether or not the city had authority to enact this policy or not, which is going to be decided in April, if not before. We did get a trial date of April 2nd, 2013. We'll have a little bench trial, maybe put on some witnesses, testimony about the policy.
What will it take to get us back to the rule of law, we ask him. What do the citizens of Los Angeles need to do to the political class to demand that they follow the laws instead of corrupting them? Who should we mobilize to take back control from the political class?
Whistleblowers, taxpayers, public activists, any number of creative ways to stick your nose into issues and, stir the pot. Make yourself heard, and don't let these issues just be swept under the rug because, the political class seems to have decided what it wants to decide.
Mr. Orphanides was optimistic about the future after his day in court.
And hopefully we had a little victory today where we won a victory for the right to sue your government to try to fix this, without having to feel like you're going to be financially ruined down the road if you don't prevail.
We want to thank Paul Orphanides for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Do you think our government needs to write special laws that protect special classes of people rather than stepping back and providing equal protection for all? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number and tell us what you think at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777. And if you leave your name and number, we'll get back to you. Or you can log on to our website at fulldisclosure.net and leave your opinion there. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. I'm Leslie Dutton. Please join us next time for another edition of Full Disclosure. Thank you.
To respond to this question or comment on this program, please call 800-867-7777 or visit fulldisclosure.net. Transcripts or DVD copies of this program are also available on our website. Full Disclosure, the news behind the news.
Full Disclosure has been the lone voice covering the travesty of the arrest of former U.S. Prosecutor Richard I. Fine, who was jailed in the harshest possible condition of solitary coercive confinement for 18 months, merely for civil contempt of court. Alan, you were there that day in the courtroom when Richard Fine was arrested.
I was.
We were all there watching what was going on and wondering what was happening. Alan Paracchini was the public affairs officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court, and he knew what was going on. He's here to tell the whole story. You may be horrified by what he has to say about our justice system. Next on Full Disclosure.
Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news.
Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're going to bring you the news behind the news in this part one of our special report with Alan Paracchini, former Public Affairs Officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court. We asked him to describe what he knew in his official capacity about the Richard Fine case.
When I first got to the court in 2002, within the first few months, I was told that there was this very vexatious litigant and person very unpopular with the judges, Richard Fine. In fact, there was even a policy that if Mr. Fine was seen in the Moss courthouse by anybody under any circumstances, security was to be called. And it was clear that Mr. Fine was the subject of an enormous amount of just visceral hatred on the part of the judges. I would say the majority, if not a vast majority of judges.
Why? Why would a renowned lawyer, a man that had been a federal prosecutor, who had become the people's advocate in a number of class action suits, why would he be so hated by an entire courthouse of judges?
It was all about money and benefits. And they could say what they will about Mr. Fine being a gadfly, a vexatious litigant, somebody who had refused an order to divulge certain information in a case he was litigating, and that's all true. But what was really going on is the judges were so intent on doing whatever they could to damage Mr. Fine that that overcame common sense that one might have expected.
In other words, the judge's hatred for Mr. Fine completely abrogated any sense of justice, and everybody in the courthouse knew it. And in fact, Judge Yaffe was the attack dog assigned to take him out.
It was clear from weeks before Judge Yaffe sentenced Mr. Fine that was what was going to happen. But the amazing part of it was that if you look at the way Judge Yaffe himself ran the case, it sort of leaves you open-mouthed in lack of comprehension, because he sent Mr. Fine to jail indefinitely.
The fact that Mr. Fine was sentenced to an indefinite period of time was what made it so extraordinary. At the whim of Judge Yaffe, he could have been incarcerated for the rest of his life. And the longer it went on, the more it revealed the malicious attitude of the court.
It was clear from, well, I used to say it was clear from the moment Mr. Fine was handcuffed. It was certainly clear by 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks after that he was simply not going to comply with what the court had ordered him to do. And if the purpose of jailing someone for contempt is to force their hand and make them cooperate, it wasn't going to work. And so the longer it went on, the more and more and more over the months it became just a vindictive action that was maintained simply because of the enmity with which Mr. Fine was viewed by judges.
As the incarceration dragged on, what was the perspective of the court, we asked him?
After about a year, 14 months, we would get media calls periodically. What about Fine? When's he going to get out? And the answer we were always directed to provide was, Mr. Fine has the keys to his own jail cell. He can unlock his door and let himself out anytime he wants to comply with the court's order. But as the months went on, it became clearer and clearer and clearer to reporters and to people, I think, that this wasn't about contempt. This wasn't about getting him to disclose whatever it was he was directed to disclose, something about fees, I think. It was about getting back at him and wanting to keep him quiet. And I really increasingly felt that that was just not a position that was becoming to the court's role in our society.
The judges should have been embarrassed by the bald-faced appearance of persecution for keeping Mr. Fine in jail for such a long time. We asked him what he heard.
It was widely known that Judge Yaffe was at near retirement age. And it was also widely known that there were questions about how Judge Yaffe had handled the case. For example, I could not believe, even though I had to keep a straight face in the courtroom and not say anything to anybody, but for a judge to allow himself to be called as a witness in a contempt trial and then rule on objections pertaining to his own testimony was beyond the pale of imagination. How could Judge Yaffe have allowed himself to be drawn into that kind of thing?
So Judge Yaffe was a liability to the court. Apparently, the court thought that they could dump the whole problem by dumping Judge Yaffe.
Judge Yaffe was an irascible guy. I liked him, but he had a way of speaking before he thought, oftentimes. And I told my boss on any number of occasions that there were few and far between times when I was in Judge Yaffe's courtroom when he didn't do or say something inappropriate. But after Fine had been in for 12 to 14 months, there was a decision made, even though the public posture, of course, is no judge, each judge is a constitutionally independently elected public official. So no judge at the Superior Court level can tell another judge at the Superior Court level what to do. You and I both know that that's absurd. It happens all the time.
Does this sound like politics in the courtroom? And drama, too. And here in Los Angeles, we have it all. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll hear more of this sordid story. We'll be right back.
It's one of the few organizations that takes the time to really investigate and dig deep, and they're covering things nobody else does. I think it plays a very vital role in helping the community, and in a free society we're dependent upon free journalism doing their job. Full Disclosure's done an incredible job of that.
Welcome back to part one of our interview with Alan Paracchini, former public affairs officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court. So the court has this embarrassing situation where Mr. Fine won't submit to orders by Judge Yaffe, and he just sits in jail, making them look foolish and vindictive. What are they to do?
A court attorney by the name of Fred Bennett, somebody you probably are familiar with, was directed to do a file review. And Bennett went through the entire, I don't know how many volumes there are. I actually have meant to go down and pull the file in the archives and look through it myself. I've just never gotten around to it. His conclusions were, two of them were very interesting. First, there were many orders that Yaffe had apparently made or intended to make that he had never signed. So they had never acquired the actual status of valid court orders. What they all were, we were never given a list. But also that there were orders that were signed, but were never served on Mr. Fine. So the file was a mess. And so there came a point where a decision was made at the court leadership level that a way had to be found to ease Yaffe out of the case and get Fine out of jail.
And after 18 embarrassing months, they set this plan into action.
So the plan that evolved was that Yaffe would retire in, I think, November of 2011?
It was actually October, I believe.
Okay. Well, the plan was that he would retire in November.
Oh.
And that immediately upon Judge Yaffe's retirement, a new judge would be assigned the fine case, and it was even determined who it would be. And that judge would find that there was no longer any purpose to be served by Mr. Fine's confinement and order him released. For whatever reason, Judge Yaffe himself upset that plan by deciding to release Mr. Fine on his own. And I believe that the order saying that was not written by Judge Yaffe, but was written by Fred Bennett, as were so many different orders in many different cases. They were written by Bennett with multiple objectives, one of which often was to try to extricate the court from a difficult political situation.
A difficult political situation indeed. But for Allen, the release of Mr. Fine made the political situation even worse.
I was on vacation when he was actually released, and my office called me and told me that Fine was out and they were getting run over by calls from media organizations wanting to know, had the court ordered Fine released? And I was told when I called my boss that our instructions were not to confirm that there was such an order, not to mention Fine's name, not to acknowledge hearing Fine's name, and say nothing. And my response to that was, wait a second. It's an order of the court. It's a public document. It's in the file. The prisoner has been released pursuant to that order. And we're not going to confirm or even acknowledge that there is such an order, and we're not going to acknowledge that this man, Richard Fine, exists. And basically I was told that's what you're going to do.
This is just a hint at how unreasonably vindictive the judges had become. They didn't care how foolish they looked. They wanted to erase Mr. Fine from the face of the earth, as Mr. Paracchini explains.
But I think the whole thing, as I've said, comes down to the deep anger harbored by hundreds of judges toward Mr. Fine, caused by his insistence that the legislature and the courts keep focused on the benefits issue.
Mr. Fine was a loud voice accusing the judges of taking bribes from the county. According to the California State Constitution, the Superior Court judges were to receive their salaries from the state. But the Los Angeles Superior Court judges were accepting additional benefits from LA County over and above their salaries. What possible justification were the judges using to protect these illegal payments?
There is a one-page contract between the court and the Board of Supervisors that says these benefits will be paid, and the benefits are tied to the benefits the supervisors get. So if the supervisors voted to remove the benefits from the judges, they would then have to figure out how to keep their own benefits, because the two are inextricably linked in this contract. And the contract, which I've seen any number of times, but don't have a copy of, at the end of it says this agreement will remain in force until it is terminated by the parties, plural, meaning or implying that both the court and the Board of Supervisors would have to agree to legally terminate this benefit payment relationship.
Here at Full Disclosure, we have attempted to get a copy of that agreement, but have been refused at every turn by the court and the county. We will discuss this effort in the next program with Mr. Paracchini. We asked him when this contract was adopted.
Well, the agreement dated to the days before unification. So at the time the agreement was reached, the court was a county agency. Whether such an agreement could even have been signed after unification, I have no idea. But as far as the supervisors were concerned, they were signing on to a commitment to pay benefits to a group of people who were, at the time, county judges.
So someone forgot to turn off the spigot, as one prosecutor has said. You would think that during times of economic shortfalls, the county supervisors would look to save millions of dollars going out the door every year. Oh, but wait, the supervisors get the same benefits, don't they?
When Judicial Watch finally realized that the issue to be litigated is whether it is legal for these benefits to be paid, regardless of what else you may think or not think about the court. At the point Judicial Watch finally did that, that is when that litigation succeeded. And that set off a scramble beyond all imagination, because it really did look like the judges were going to lose 29,000, I think it is, or maybe it's, when you count in some other stuff, it's about 50,000 a year in benefits.
The judges began to sweat. The success by Judicial Watch was really going to take away their illegal payments.
Judges were of two minds. Some of them told me that they were resigned to it, that they saw it coming. One judge even said, well, there goes my Hollywood Bowl season tickets. Others were just beside themselves. I would say the majority of judges were beside themselves. Then the question arose, of course, well, do any other courts do this? So the administrative office of the courts found itself having to answer that question by saying, we don't know. So they did a survey to find out what courts were paying extrajudicial benefits from county resources, and it turned out to be a whole lot more than anybody thought.
The disease had spread statewide. In fact, in some courthouses, the judges were stealing money supposedly budgeted for courthouse maintenance.
There were courts, a couple of them, that were illegally diverting court operating money to pay extra benefits. So the farther the AOC got into this, the clearer it became that there was the makings of a wonderful scandal about self-dealing and self-interest by judges.
In other words, stealing on a grand scale by the judges statewide. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll continue to explore how deep the court corruption in California really goes. We'll be right back.
Is we take freedom for granted, and we expect somebody else to do the work. And so people don't vote, people don't get involved, and then when a certain building goes up or something gets torn down, they complain about it. Full disclosure is really one of the only outlets left that tells it like it is. It doesn't, color it with left wing, right wing, whatever opinions, but tells stories that the other media won't even touch.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and part one of our interview with former Public Affairs Officer of the Los Angeles Superior Court, Alan Paracchini. Alan was explaining how the Administrative Office of the Courts discovered all kinds of malfeasance in the California Superior Courts statewide.
A lot of the courts that were caught up in this were courts in small counties, 1, 2, 3, 4 judge courts. And we would say, and I think accurately, that $187,000 a year sounds like a lot of money to you and me, but for a lawyer with the range of experience and skill that a good judge has, that means if you're going from private practice, you're going to take a gigantic hit in your salary.
Alan thought that having the same pay for every judge in every county wasn't a realistic or fair rationale for equal pay.
But on the other hand, on the far end of that spectrum, in those Tuolumne, Nevada, Placer, those small rural counties, $187,000 makes you probably the highest paid person, guy usually, in government or in the economy of some place like Mendocino. So there was a whole range of perspectives on how adequate the salary, the base salary actually was, and what were the ways you could justify paying extra benefits.
Exhibiting their usual self-righteous fashion, the judges in Los Angeles didn't want anyone mucking around with anything to do with their salaries or benefits. Stick your head in the sand and shut up was their reaction.
The LA court, even though the line of reasoning I thought we should have followed was one that a lot of judges subscribed to, the judicial leadership would always say that, well, that would concede that there's something that's inappropriate about this. And I could never understand why. But even though there was no possible way we could deny that this money was changing hands, the pressure from the judges was always to not talk about it if at all possible, to say as little as possible if we had to discuss it, and certainly not to bring in the name Richard Fine to the discussion, that we should not respond mentioning his name, that we were to consider Mr. Fine to be almost a somewhere between a ghost and a boogeyman.
But Allen didn't observe Mr. Fine to be some kind of irascible monster. How could anybody be threatened by a guy wearing a bow tie?
When I first encountered Mr. Fine, my reaction was, I can see what about his personality annoys judges. He is a persistent guy. He has filed arguably frivolous litigation from time to time. But the fact is, the man's a lawyer of many years standing. What separates him really is that he has gotten under the skin of the judges. And I don't think, and didn't think now, or didn't think then, and don't think now, that that is sufficient reason to go after Mr. Fine the way the judges did, and certainly not reason to hold him as effectively a political prisoner for a year and a half. That was unconscionable, shouldn't have happened, shouldn't have been allowed to happen.
Allen suggests that the court should have steered the whole Fine debacle away from Judge Yaffe.
Yaffe should have voluntarily recused himself from the case, certainly after the contempt trial, which was, I've seen a lot of courtrooms, and I've never seen anything like that happen.
The judges encouraged Judge Yaffe to keep Mr. Fine in jail for such a long period of time that it became patently obvious to everyone that they were merely persecuting him. We asked Allen, why were they going to such extraordinary lengths to make him suffer?
Revenge. It's that simple. The judges wanted revenge. They wanted Mr. Fine out of circulation. And they had the power to do it, and did it.
This was just the final result of the enmity against Mr. Fine. According to Allen, the judges for a long time had a coordinated campaign to monitor Mr. Fine, as if he were a dangerous felon, capable at any moment of exploding into a homicidal rage.
There were emails and memos indicating to both security personnel, the sheriff's people, and to court personnel that anytime Mr. Fine was seen in the Moss courthouse, or anywhere else in the system, but most often he was in the Moss courthouse, that his presence was to be made known to the security people immediately. I can see the argument being made in a couple of different ways, starting with he was doing what any lawyer would do and representing the interests of his clients as aggressively as he could, all the way to he was being deliberately provocative and trying to jerk the chains of hundreds of judges for a period of many years. And I think he did that.
And so apparently yanking the chain of 100 judges is punishable by imprisonment in solitary coercive confinement for 18 months, right?
But there's nothing in our system that precludes him or anybody from doing that. All the judges had to do is keep issuing appropriate orders, ignore his rhetoric, don't allow themselves to be provoked, as Judge Yaffe was, by Mr. Fine's, shall we say, rhetorical skills. Was he annoying? Sure, I can understand why judges found him annoying, but there were a whole lot of other people I thought judges either did or should have found a whole lot more annoying than Richard Fine.
But the judges rule with impunity, and Richard Fine paid the price. We want to thank Alan Paracchini for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Were you aware of the political nature and vindictive capability of judges in our court system? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number and leave your response at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777. And if you leave your name and number, we'll get back to you. Or you can log on to our website at fulldisclosure.net and leave your opinion there. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. Please join us for the next edition, when Mr. Paracchini will describe how the judges and the Los Angeles County Sheriff worked together to keep Mr. Fine in jail for as long as possible. That's coming up next on Full Disclosure. I'm Leslie Dutton. Thank you.
To respond to this question or comment on this program, please call 800-867-7777 or visit fulldisclosure.net. Transcripts or DVD copies of this program are also available on our website. Full Disclosure, the news behind the news.
There's absolutely no question that I'm a political prisoner.
Richard Fine spent 18 months in solitary coercive confinement as a result of accusing the Los Angeles Superior Court judges of bribery. How can this happen in America? We interviewed Alan Paracchini, the former public affairs officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court, who was there during the persecution of Richard Fine. He'll relate from his own personal experience the whole sordid history next on Full Disclosure.
Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news.
Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're bringing you the news behind the news in this part 2 of our special report with Alan Paracchini, the former public affairs officer for LA Superior Court. We asked him what made Richard Fine such a pariah to the judges in Los Angeles.
His was a name in a truly unique category as far as the court was concerned. He was to be treated as a serious enemy of the court under all circumstances, and that my office in particular was to have no contact with him. Which was very difficult on days when he was in court, and on days he was in court, one of us would be there necessarily because we knew there would be media coverage no matter what. In fact, Mr. Fine figured out what I did and would occasionally greet me, and I was in a position where I had been forbidden to have any conversation with him.
He was forbidden to have any conversation with Mr. Fine. It's like the judges had a childlike fear that Mr. Fine was a dangerous threat to the court and their staff. This prohibition was particularly ridiculous, but once again shows how irrational the judge's attitude was toward Mr. Fine.
Now, I would not typically have a conversation with a litigant anyway. That is generally, in the job I had, generally inappropriate. But such questions as, where's the bathroom, are there media people here? Those are simply questions about fact that can be answered in 1 or 2 words. I never had, and Mr. Fine never attempted to draw me into a conversation about what I thought about the merits of the case in which he was involved. He knew that I was doing my job, and he certainly was smart enough to know that when he saw me come out of Judge Yaffe's chambers just before a hearing was going to begin, Mr. Fine's no fool. He knew that we were talking about how it might play out and how the media might see things and what Yaffe planned to do. So what was the point? And more than that, what was the point of imprisoning this guy for 1.5 years?
That is the ultimate question. And why was Mr. Fine kept in solitary coercive confinement? We asked Alan if there was a conspiracy between the court and the sheriff to make Mr. Fine as uncomfortable as possible while in jail.
In all fairness to the sheriff, what I was told was that Mr. Fine was assigned as he was for 2 reasons. First of all, he was a notorious inmate. He was well known. His case was widely reported in the media. From the sheriff's perspective, the last thing you want to have happen is some kind of assault, injury, anything on a prisoner like that. So there was also some issues, or were issues, relating to Mr. Fine's health. And many inmates about whom there are ongoing health concerns are assigned as Mr. Fine was. So I don't, frankly, see it as deliberately coercive confinement. I see it as an understandable security decision that the sheriff made. And I really can't argue with how he was classified. If you think that cell was bad, you would, if you'd seen him in one of the big dormitory areas overcrowded with hundreds of inmates who had committed serious violent crime, you would have been 1,000 times as appalled by his housing conditions as you were when you saw where he was actually incarcerated.
Full Disclosure had to file a lawsuit against the Sheriff's Department in order to get an interview with Mr. Fine in jail. We were informed that the judge had ordered Mr. Fine not to talk to the media.
I don't believe that was true. I don't recall Yaffe saying anything. Certainly he and I never had a conversation about that. If we had, I would have suggested to him that that would be a very bad idea. That doesn't sound like an order he would have made, even under this, or even as extraordinary as the handling of that case was from the court's perspective. For one thing, I don't know that the judge has the power to prohibit the sheriff from allowing the inmate to talk.
But how could this be, we asked him. We were denied access to Mr. Fine, supposedly on the orders of the court. Alan had a different perspective.
Let's just say that the sheriff's media relations office has a reputation for being somewhere between deliberately inaccurate and innocently not forthcoming. There were any number of instances, for example, when Paris Hilton was jailed by Judge Sauer in that DUI case. And she was sentenced, and Sheriff Baca, and on the sentencing form, Judge Sauer clearly wrote in, it was like John Hancock, letters this big, no home detention, no early release. The sentencing order couldn't have been more clear. But she was released to home detention anyway. Then there ensued that memorable day when the judge ordered the sheriffs to go out, get her from her house, bring her to the courtroom, and he re-jailed her. And the sheriff's department told reporters that the judge had specifically authorized the home detention release. And it was completely fabricated. The conversation, the sheriff's department said, occurred between the undersheriff and Judge Sauer never happened. The judge never gave anybody any reason to believe that his sentencing order meant anything more than it said. You could, if you were an uncharitable person, you could say that the sheriff's media relations person lied. I'm a very charitable person, but I wouldn't argue with that characterization.
So the sheriff's department lied to full disclosure? Apparently, once Mr. Fine was incarcerated, there was no further interest in his situation by the court. According to Allen, his persecution in the jail was not directed by the court.
But was there an order saying that in Fine's case? Frankly, I doubt it. I never saw it. I would be very skeptical about that. And I'm not sure that there was any ongoing monitoring by Judge Yaffe about Mr. Fine's confinement.
We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll hear more of this troubling story. We'll be right back.
Thomas Jefferson said, "People cannot be ignorant and free at the same time." Everything should be done at the local level, and people should be interested in what's going on at the local level. Full disclosure has that rare and unique ability to bring the issues to the people that they don't find anyplace else in the news.
Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Alan Paracchini, former public affairs officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court. It seems that the sheriff was in league with the court to persecute Mr. Fine. Mr. Fine was never charged with a crime.
True.
He was never convicted.
Not of a crime.
Yes, not of a crime. And the sheriff...
But he was, in fairness to Judge Yaffe, he was found guilty of contempt. Now, that is not guilt of a crime, it is guilt of contempt.
Yes, and the laws pertaining to contempt have limitations on them, don't they?
Right.
So the sheriff and his attorneys refused to tell the court or respond to the writ of habeas corpus as to why they were holding him. How can that happen?
I don't know. One thing worth remembering, though, is that the court counsel, Fred Bennett, is a retired former attorney from the county counsel's office. And for years and years and years, he represented the sheriff's department as a county counsel attorney. And his perspective has really never left the county. And like so many people in the court who haven't yet gotten comfortable with the fact that the court is no longer a county agency. And that's why you see this particular court locked in such a feudal political battle with the administrative office of the court over budget and power issues. The judges of the LA Superior Court are still not ready to accept that the voters enacted unification. County courts became entities of the state, and the state runs the show. And that's the reality. That's what the law now says. And unless the unification initiative can be nullified or overturned, that is the way the courts are. But the LA court in particular, many courts, but the LA court in particular, is still not ready to agree that the power has shifted and the judges here no longer have it.
So the judges in the Los Angeles Superior Court are dinosaurs resisting the state-mandated changes required by the state constitution. We asked Alan if the other judges thought that Judge Yaffe was an embarrassment for the entire courthouse because of his obstinate persecution of Mr. Fine.
Just the opposite. I suspect that there is a room in Moss Courthouse, a room, I think it's 323, that is the judge's cafeteria. And those who don't go out to lunch every day, which is most of them, generally eat there. And of course, there's always many judges sitting around these communal and tables and easy chairs they have. And the true peer-to-peer pressure occurs in situations like that, or over the lunch table at a restaurant, or in social interactions among judges outside of court hours. I was never present for a conversation between judges and Judge Yaffe about this, but there is no doubt in my mind, having been in that judge's cafeteria on dozens of different occasions for one thing or another, that Judge Yaffe was receiving a great many pats on the back and attaboys and encouragement not to give in, and before he sentenced Fine, encouragement to give Fine what he deserves.
Give him what he deserves. We ask Alan if the judges had any sense of moral decency.
Judges are people too. They are subject to peer pressure. They have many of them have their own financial self-interest ahead of anything else, and many don't. I don't want to give the impression that there is one unbroken nature of behavior among the judges. There are many, many judges who are absolutely true to their oaths, who are absolutely committed to making the system work and treating litigants equally and fairly. Particularly in family law, you encounter that a lot. But there are more than a small number of judges who don't see it that way, and were eager to see as much punishment meted out to Richard Fine as possible.
The judicial canons of ethics demand that judges cannot sit on a case where they have accepted money from a party to the case. But it's now established fact that the judges of Los Angeles Superior Court have been receiving illegal benefits from the county for over 25 years. Doesn't this appear to be a conflict of interest?
Of course, because the county is, in one capacity or another, is a litigant, either as a plaintiff or defendant, in thousands of cases in the course of any one year. I will say that this is, and I've heard Mr. Fine go down this line of reasoning and others many, many times, and I think it's a red herring. First of all, when the court was a county agency, the judges were being paid 100% of their salaries by the county. So how is it different today with post-unification when the judges receive a comparatively small amount of money in benefits from the county? I don't see, and in the 8.5 years I was there, I saw no evidence that the county was unduly favored by judges. I think, in all due respect, I think that is simply wide of the mark.
But in interviews here on Full Disclosure, Richard Fine documented the outrageous imbalance in the number of cases where the judges decided in favor of the county.
I can see how one could surmise that there would be an inherent conflict of interest in this relationship. If perception is 9/10 of reality, then you're right. All I'm saying is I never really saw any evidence of that in the cases in which I was involved. And I don't think that Judge Yaffe's outcome with Richard Fine was related to his doing the bidding of the county. If anything, he was doing what he himself thought Mr. Fine deserved and what his colleagues and friends kept urging him to do and kept telling him was what Mr. Fine deserved.
We'll be right back.
All we read is what the media wants us to read. And you really don't hear how can we help and be aware of situations that we could maybe make a difference. It portrays individuals, how they can be helpful, what they do to make a difference.
We ask Alan to describe his role working with the media.
My objective whenever I went in to talk to judges was if it would always be the case that we expected media coverage. And I would go in and ask what might occur in the impending hearing. But more important, how would the judge prefer we explain that to media? There was never an occasion that I recall when any judge asked me what he or she thought they ought to rule, or what I thought about the evidence, or what I thought about the witnesses, or anything like that. I was present in judges' chambers when other parties were there, other judges, where such a dialogue did occur, but I never became personally involved in it. My interest in the day that Fine was hooked up was a perfect example. I went in to ask Yaffe to tell him that there was a large media contingent, because I did that anytime there was, and I wanted to be sure that any judge didn't walk out of chambers onto the bench and see a room full of 50 reporters. I thought it was part of our position to let them know what to anticipate. And I asked Yaffe, what is the likely range of outcomes here? And if you do decide to hook him up and send him to jail, is there anything that you're not going to say directly on the record? Do you want to give us guidance in terms of how we explain this? And that was a very, very common kind of conversation to have.
Full disclosure's never been allowed to video record proceedings in the courtroom. We ask him if this is just animus toward full disclosure, or was it a blanket policy for the entire court?
No, no. Every single, this was my practice. Anyway, I can't say what's happened since November of 2010 because I haven't been there. My practice was that every camera request was to be immediately sent on to the courtroom. And even if it was a judge we knew would never in a million years permit cameras, they still were to be asked every time, what's your decision on this? There were no policy rules. There was no automatic decision that would be conveyed by the Public Information Office.
So it was an arbitrary decision to purposefully exclude full disclosure from the Los Angeles Superior Courtrooms. He gave another example of a notable exception.
In fact, there were a couple of judges, one in particular, Judge Pastor, who had very strong feelings about cameras. He wanted no part of them in his courtroom. But on the day that the city officials of Bell were arraigned, for some reason they were arraigned in one department, and then the case was adjourned and sent to Pastor for a bail hearing. And instantly, all the news outlets in town filed camera applications. And I jokingly, we sent them on to Pastor. We jokingly told them all, you got no prayer. You know this guy as well as I do. He's not going to allow cameras. We've sent them on, but I would say there's a 100% chance you're going to turn out to be out of luck. So I go up to his chambers about 10 minutes before the hearing, and I said, and of course we've told them, we suspect you're not going for cameras. He said, no, cameras can come in. And his reasoning was sound on two grounds. First, the judge who handled the arraignment that morning, Hillary Merritt, in Department 44, had allowed cameras. He thought it would be inexplicably inconsistent in a case of undeniable community interest for one judge to permit cameras in the morning and the other one not to in the afternoon. He also said that he was conscious that this was not the average celebrity case where the interest in camera coverage was salacious or prurient, as it so often is. That's irrelevant under the First Amendment as far as I'm concerned, but it is an issue. But Judge Pastor acknowledged that he recognized that the people of Bell couldn't all get to the courtroom, that this was, these were allegations that went right to the heart of whether the city was a viable government and whether its elected officials were thieves and felons. He said the people of Bell have a right to be able to see that. So I went out into the hallway, and I'd been so effective in warning people that there was nobody in the hallway with a camera. So I had to go back into the judge and say, you'll have to wait about 10 minutes because they got to find somebody with a camera who can come up and shoot. And it took about that long to convey that.
He explained that they kept records, and there were a surprising number of camera requests that were allowed by the judges, just not full disclosures.
We kept, I think it still exists, but I'm not sure. We had an ongoing database that recorded every camera petition that came in, who it was from, the case number, the judge, the date of the hearing, nature of the hearing, and the outcome, the decision. So we could track, and a surprising thing, I think to many news people, probably to you, is that in the 8.5 years I was there, a pretty substantial majority of camera requests were granted.
Full Disclosure's been trying to complete our documentary on the persecution of Richard Fine by video recording a reading of the transcript of Richard Fine's remarks in the empty courtroom where he had been arrested. We have even sued the court to get access, and still we are being denied. Allen saw repeated use of the courtrooms by a variety of other media outlets, just not Full Disclosure.
It also is in conflict with decisions that were made time and time again by me on behalf of or by judges in situations where a media organization would apply for camera coverage. The judge would deny it. The media organization would come back and say, well, can we at least shoot the courtroom empty and the jury box empty? And almost always those requests were granted. Now, my argument was this builds relationships. And if it's a debit and credit business, then if we do NBC a favor today, we can call that in sometime in the future. Meaning, typically, when budget times got tough and we wanted the situation covered, we were in a much stronger position to argue that they should decide to do the story than if we hadn't helped them out.
But you do allow ABC and NBC?
We did.
We did?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Frequently.
So.
And if it came to it, I couldn't come up with a list of cases and dates, but it was certainly a widespread practice, and it occurred in many different courthouses.
Just not Full Disclosure. We want to thank Alan Paracchini for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Do you think that prohibition of our Full Disclosure program was due to the bias of the court in favor of the mainstream media and against the independence of the alternative media? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number and tell us what you think at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777. And if you leave your name and number, we'll get back to you. Or you can log on to our website at fulldisclosure.net and leave your opinion there. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. I'm Leslie Dutton. Please join us next time for another edition of Full Disclosure. Thank you.
To respond to this question or comment on this program, please call 800-867-7777 or visit fulldisclosure.net. Transcripts or DVD copies of this program are also available on our website. Full Disclosure, the news behind the news.
The strategy is always pretty uniform. Resist, 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 stonewall, stonewall, stonewall.
Alan Paracchini is talking about the strategy of the Los Angeles Superior Court in their response to any Public Records Act requests. Where on earth do they get this imperious attitude? We'll find out next on Full Disclosure.
Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news.
Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're bringing you the news behind the news in this part 3 of our series featuring Alan Paracchini, former public affairs officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court. We had submitted a Public Records Act request to the court to get all of the emails, letters, and correspondences that in any way regarded attorney Richard I. Fine. We got nothing. According to Alan, this is just standard court practice.
Bear in mind that the court's pretty consistent strategy on any kind of request for information from the public, and that can be public document requests through just ordinary questions. The strategy is always pretty uniform. Resist, 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 stonewall, stonewall, stonewall. And that's because there's a large faction of the judges who really don't believe it's any of the public's business how the court operates. And it's their view that what the public information and public relations component of the court should be doing is, as one judge told me once, keep them out, meaning the media and the public for that matter. So it really doesn't matter what it is. You could have written them a letter asking them to document the cost of fluorescent light replacements for a year, and they would have stonewalled for as many months as they possibly could. It's just an instinctive, very well-entrenched mindset among the judges in the court that they simply don't want to cooperate with the public's curiosity about how the court works.
Where does this imperious attitude come from? Aren't the judges supposed to be public servants? Alan explains that the ultimate authority is the appellate court.
I don't want to tar everyone on the bench with one characterization, because that would not be fair. But there is a large portion of judges who see the court as their possession. It belongs to them. And they're independently elected state officials. So there is no one who can tell them, you can't do that, unless it's ultimately a judge at an appellate level higher than them that contradicts what they've ruled or what the position they've taken. And their attitude is, until an appellate court forces us to do something, if we don't want to do it, we aren't going to. And cooperating with the public is one of the things that many of those judges and the judicial leadership doesn't want to do.
In 1960, California voters approved a constitutional amendment that created the Commission on Judicial Performance to enforce rigorous standards of discipline in cases of judicial misconduct to maintain the public confidence in the integrity of the court. Can we turn to them for redress?
I'm not aware of any complaint made to the CJP by the LA Superior Court about a judge's behavior on the bench in the 8.5 years I was there, other than for situations where there was a health problem or a drug problem, and judges are people too, these things happen to them. So except in those very narrow circumstances, the court never pursued misconduct complaints against any judge.
Then how about their bosses? Can the public seek justice from the supervising judges?
Supervising judges and the presiding judge have really only one power, and that's the presiding judge decides where individual judges will be assigned. The supervising judge at the local courthouse decides to what courtroom and what work assignment in that courthouse will that judge be assigned. So the presiding judge can make life pretty unhappy for a judge. There used to be a phrase in the court called freeway therapy, which meant if you departed from what you were supposed to do or think, you would be sent to Lancaster. So imagine if you're a judge who lives, for example, in Long Beach, and you do something that upsets the presiding judge or some other judge in the leadership, and you get transferred to Lancaster. That means you have a commute from Long Beach to Lancaster every day.
According to Allen, the supervising judge can make subordinate judges unhappy as well.
Now, a supervising judge in a local courthouse can say, you have incurred the displeasure effectively. You've incurred the displeasure of the leadership. Therefore, you're going to have a traffic court calendar. And this would be a judge who typically wants, if it's a judge who likes criminal work, he or she would want a felony, a major felony caseload, like the judges on the 9th floor of the criminal courts building downtown have. If it's a judge whose interests are civil, that would be a courtroom in the Mosque Courthouse downtown handling large civil cases. So, and there are plum assignments in every courthouse and bad assignments in every courthouse. And the supervising judge can make the life of a judge in his or her courthouse miserable or happy.
After Mr. Fine was released from jail, the presiding judge was reassigned to some obscure courthouse in Pomona. We asked Allen if that was due to the embarrassing situation caused by the Fine incarceration.
Presiding judges, when they leave office, typically can choose any assignment they want. In Judge McCoy's case, he lives in Claremont. That's what he wanted. He wanted a courtroom in Pomona.
Ah, but there are disciplinary actions taken by the presiding judge, as in the case of Judge Oakey, which we will hear about when we come back from this short break. We'll be right back.
Got so much corruption going on. The media is controlled by one side. And unfortunately, a lot of people, especially living in LA today, they're not involved. Full disclosure, it's a blessing because they actually tell the truth. They give you the real details, the real stats of what's going on in our community.
Welcome back to part 3 of our series with Allen Perricini, the former public affairs officer for the Los Angeles Superior Court. After witnessing the blatant persecution of Richard Fine by Judge Yaffe, Full Disclosure was investigating whether there was any protection for citizens against out-of-control judges. We will see that the Commission on Judicial Performance is of little value against a rogue judge, but the presiding judge can act in a disciplinary fashion, as observed in the case against another judge, Judge Oakey, who was knocked out of the normal succession by an error in judgment.
Judge Oakey got caught up in something of a scandal in about 2002 over, and so did Judge Wesley, ironically, the incoming presiding judge. They got involved in an incident after a Memorial Day weekend in which they insisted on closing a very busy arraignment court at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon before all of the defendants who needed to be arraigned could be. And as a result, a couple dozen in custody defendants were released, one of whom subsequently murdered someone. And that became a very, very hot issue. And Oakey, who was at the time assistant presiding judge and the heir apparent by the law of succession, they observed, he was going to be the next presiding judge. He couldn't take the heat and went back to Pomona of his own volition. He wanted to get out. He was under a lot of pressure. And I think when I've read the entire transcript for that whole day, and Judge Oakey and Judge Wesley were, in fact, directly responsible for what happened. There's no avoiding that. It is what happened, for better or for worse.
But Judge Wesley was involved in the same situation as Oakey. But now he has become the presiding judge. We ask Alan, how is this possible?
Wesley has enjoyed a remarkable comeback.
Alan explained that each judge has a lot of autonomy within their courtroom.
Strictly the way the system is supposed to work, no Superior Court judge can overrule or tell another Superior Court judge what to do. Now, that includes the presiding judge. The presiding judge cannot call up a judge on the phone and say, "You're wrong, you've got to rule this way, or else." Can't do it. As a matter of reality, however, there are situations where exactly that happens. In the Lindsay Lohan case, Judge Fox made a mistake and refused to set bail for Ms. Lohan. He was wrong. Wrong on the law, wrong on the case law, just plain wrong. He screwed up. And he was hauled on the carpet for that, and Judge Schnegg issued a contradictory order and set bail. Now, in theory, that doesn't happen. Strictly speaking, it's not like you can call up the presiding judge and say, Judge Yaffe, in the case of Mr. Fine's contempt hearing, allowed himself to be drawn into a situation where he was sworn as a witness and then ruled himself on objections during the trial. That was one of the most bizarre days I've ever witnessed in the court. Yaffe could not be disciplined or compelled to change his approach by the presiding judge. It just it can't happen that way.
But there are a couple avenues for disgruntled plaintiffs if they feel they've been abused by the judge.
What does happen is either somebody will be dissatisfied with the results and take a case up to usually the Court of Appeal, or file a disciplinary complaint with the Commission on Judicial Performance, which receives about 1,100 of those a year and takes any action at all in about 30. So the odds of a judge being subject to disciplinary proceedings by the CJP are very, very low under any circumstances.
You mentioned that the appellate court could do something, but would it be through an action of the Commission on Judicial Performance, or it would just be the course of a case that would move in that direction, and that they would deem the judge was so out of line that they could call for discipline?
That could happen. I'm not aware that it ever has happened, but an appellate court typically gets a dispute that is not satisfactorily resolved, which is many of them, gets taken up by one or the other parties. And if the appellate court feels that the judge screwed up, then they can say so. They can, if they so desire, they can make the Commission on Judicial Performance aware of misconduct. They can do that.
But there is a question of whether the Commission on Judicial Performance has lost its authority to impose discipline on judges due to enactment of a statute authorized by Senate Bill SBX 211. In a letter sent to then Attorney General Brown and current Attorney General Kamala Harris, the Commission on Judicial Performance wrote, "Does the legislature have the authority to enact legislation that purports to preclude the Commission from disciplining California Superior Court judges for authorizing supplemental compensation to be paid to themselves from public funds and or receiving that supplemental compensation on the ground that such benefits were or are not authorized by law?"
The statute in question that was indeed enacted at 2 in the morning in the middle of the night with no public hearing, the mechanism that was chosen for that was they discovered that in the decision in the Sturgeon matter, boards of supervisors, it held that boards of supervisors didn't have the statutory power to make those payments, because the legislature had never specifically enacted a law allowing that. So the overall purpose of that bill was to clean that up. It was for the legislature to say, okay, boards of supervisors, if they want to, can do this.
But the legislature cannot amend the state constitution without a vote of the people. And the 2008 Sturgeon decision revealed that these ongoing payments violated the state constitution.
The fact that those payments had been, strictly speaking, illegal for years was never addressed.
But these are judges. They obviously should know the law and the Constitution. How could they possibly justify continuing taking these illegal payments?
Judges knew where that money came from. Judges assumed that the payment was legal. Judges saw no conflict of interest in accepting payment from the state and payment from the county for essentially the same thing, fringe benefits. I've had some very long and earnest conversations with friends who are judges, and I think there is a view among the more conscientious ones that should that practice be discontinued, they would simply have to accept it. And as one judge put it to me, there goes my Hollywood Bowl tickets. I think the majority of them see it as an entitlement. They don't really have any understanding or appreciation of the fact that they're essentially being paid to do the same thing twice.
Again, how can the judges look in the mirror, ignore the state constitution, and keep taking the money? According to Allen, their greed seems to blind them.
It's clear that the judge's financial self-interest is so tied up in those benefit payments that the judges of a court, whichever one it is, of which there were several and still are, I think, several, a judge of that court has no business making rulings on the propriety or impropriety of those payments. And I think over time, that's a principle that has been widely ignored, particularly in the LA court.
And so there is a code of silence. Nobody dares speak about the payments. No wonder Richard Fine was such a thorn in their side. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll continue finding more dirt on the California judges. We'll be right back.
People have to know what's going on, and with the controlled media that we have, they choose what they want to publicize. Full disclosure is an essential thing in Los Angeles because the media just doesn't go after the tough questions. Full disclosure does ask the tough questions and goes after the tough issues.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure. It is common practice for judges to recuse themselves if they have any small personal or financial relationships to either parties appearing before them. The judges sit on cases regularly where the county is involved in litigation without recusing themselves. Have you ever heard any rumors or any discussion from the judges that they were concerned about that as a problem?
No. I think it's important, however, to remember that before the courts unified in 2000, the counties were responsible for all of the compensation the judge got. So if a judge could sit in a case involving the county when the county was paying all of his or her salary, then the situation now in which the state pays the vast majority, pays the salary and benefits, and individual counties may add on to that as they decide. I don't think, or I know of no judge who sees that as a conflict. I'll also say, though, that in all of the courtrooms I spent time in, and all the judges I've seen, I have not seen any evidence of bias for the County of Los Angeles strictly for that reason. They've ruled in the county's favor, but I'm not aware of a judge who ruled in the county's favor because he or she was getting money from the county. I'm not saying it's never happened. I've never seen it.
It's just a coincidence then that according to the report to the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors by the County Council, between 2005 and 2008, only 3 cases were decided by a judge against the county. A coincidence. Fred Bennett was Deputy County Counsel, and he's now the legal counsel to the Superior Court. He's been on both sides of the illegal payment issue. Full Disclosure had asked Mr. Bennett if he had received the same retroactive immunity from prosecution as the judges for his role in the illegal payments to the judges. His curious response was that he had malpractice insurance. We asked Alan to explain this bizarre response.
His response is, however, kind of mystifying. If I were Fred Bennett, I would want to explain what the premise of instituting that policy was in the first place. And I don't think he can run away from that. He was in the county counsel's office when the agreement was reached. He's been at the court when the policy came into dispute and throughout the Sturgeon litigation. I don't see how he runs away from that.
Full Disclosure had filed a public records request and under the court rules to obtain a copy of the contract between the County of Los Angeles and the Superior Court, which authorized the payment of the illegal double benefits to the judges, which both the county and the court have withheld.
I think the judges, as a group, simply don't want confirmation publicly of the provisions of that agreement. So it's a document that many reporters have gone after. To my knowledge, no one has ever gotten it. And it becomes a situation of how long can the court stonewall before the requesting reporter or a member of the public, but typically it's a journalist, before that person gives up. So if the court doesn't want to give something up, even if Mr. Bennett and others know that this is a document or it's information that is by any interpretation is public information or should be, they have infinite patience and an endless checkbook to fight litigation that would force them to give it up.
The problem is when you're playing in their house, you're playing by their rules, and they can make them up as they go along. Who's going to contest that? After all, they are judges.
I saw this manifest itself in many ways. The one that stuck in my craw most was delaying stonewalling for 6 or 8 months when a reporter asked what the salary of the executive officer of the court was. They didn't want to give it up. Now, I told everybody who worked for me, if somebody asks you what your salary is, tell them. We're all in this together. We're all public employees. I never hesitated to disclose what I was making. And I don't think any public employee in our system has the luxury of saying, my compensation is none of your business.
Is there anyone else that you know of that has seen that court agreement besides them?
I assume, though I don't know, but I assume anybody who's been presiding judge over the last 20 years knew about it or has seen it. But I don't know that for a fact.
Why would a presiding judge be familiar or have access to that contract?
Because the issue of the double benefit payments has been a hot issue for the court because of the Sturgeon litigation and the various iterations that the Judicial Watch organization went through in filing several different cases, one of which Sturgeon was ultimately successful. But Judicial Watch is not the only party that's been curious over the years to what that system is. And I think every presiding judge and assistant presiding judge coming newly into office has recognized that they need to understand what the basis for those payments is.
But Richard Fine has made the illegal benefits issue his crusade, which has apparently infuriated the judges to such a degree that they have given up any charade of propriety and assaulted Richard Fine with such overwhelming rage that it is obvious now for everyone to see.
The appearance of conflict of interest on the part of judges, because they get money from the county that duplicates compensation they already get from the state, that is an insurmountable appearance of conflict. And in public employment, as many people have observed over time, appearance is often more important than what's actually going on. And judges are blind to appearances. They don't get it. And that's too bad, but it was one of the things that surprised me most when I got to the court was how in denial judges are about how the way they do business appears.
We want to thank Alan Paracchini for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Is it okay for the judges in Los Angeles Superior Court to be paid illegal, unconstitutional double benefits when all other state employees are having their benefits cut? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number and tell us what you think at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777. And if you leave your name and number, we'll get back to you. Or you can log on to our website at fulldisclosure.net and leave your opinion there. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. I'm Leslie Dutton. Please join us for another edition of Full Disclosure. Thank you.
To respond to this question or comment on this program, please call 800-867-7777 or visit fulldisclosure.net. Transcripts or DVD copies of this program are also available on our website. Full Disclosure, the news behind the news.